The holiday can bring a lot of wonderful and joyous things, connecting with loved ones, celebrations, festivities, maybe good food, expressions of gratitude, and feelings of hope. But there are a lot of natural stressors that can come with the holidays. Complicated family dynamics, financial strain, increased time and energy demand for organizing, planning, running to get things done. For a lot of people, depending on where you live, changing weather, coldness, darkness, and also it can be a time for grieving and reflecting on loss. Can you go ahead and switch? There we go. For people living with cognitive impairment and their family members, the holidays can have some added challenges. Interactions with family members and engagement in holiday activities may look and feel very different depending on the type of cognitive difficulties someone is experiencing. There are many, many forms of cognitive impairment and dementia, and while Alzheimer's disease is the most common, we know that there are a variety of health conditions that can impact how our brain functions. And depending on the type of condition someone has, this can look very different for one person living with cognitive impairment compared to another one. Some of these difficulties can be things like repeating stories, having trouble recognizing family members at family events or on Zoom, or confusion about who's there or what's going on. For other people, this could be difficulty communicating, trouble following a conversation, difficulty finding words, or maybe using the wrong words and not noticing or having difficulty explaining back to family members. Sometimes with cognitive impairment and dementia, people can also start acting differently and in surprising ways. Maybe having difficulty inhibiting inappropriate comments during conversation, or doing inappropriate behaviors that they didn't do in the past. Or maybe they're quicker to anger or get frustrated more easily, and this is new and an adjustment. All of these things represent common problems that can impact how someone with cognitive impairment experiences the holidays. And to add on to that, we have a very different set of things we're dealing with holidays in the COVID era, right? So with the pandemic, all of us are finding new ways to connect with each other. Some people are having to make tough decisions about how to balance safety and staying at home with our desire to connect with people. Many common family traditions are not possible in the same way because of this, things like large family gatherings around the holidays. And we're having to adjust our expectations about what we can do for the holiday season and still get that meaning out of it. Lockdowns and restrictions have also made it hard for people in terms of accessing their typical resources and source of support. And on top of all of this, people are having to cope with things like fear, uncertainty, grief, and loss. And then we have a political environment that's also heated, which can make talking to loved ones with differing views extremely difficult. One of the major adjustments we're all facing is having to rely on technology and connecting virtually with each other, which can be great. And it's amazing that we have this opportunity. But I think it goes without saying that there are many frustrations that this can add for any interaction, and especially around the holidays. Things like slowed connections, muffled or delayed audio. If there are lots of people on the call talking over each other, having trouble coordinating a conversation, and delays. And all of these things make communication hard for anyone, even without dementia, and they're just that much harder when there's cognitive impairment on the table too. So with these changes in light, we wanted to spend some of our time today talking with you about some tips and tricks for making the holiday season more manageable, while also retaining some of those positive things about the holidays, the things that maximize our meaning and connection with others. So first I'll start with kind of broad overarching principles, and then we'll dive more into some practical tips. The first overarching principle I have is prioritization. Figuring out to prioritize what is the most meaningful during the holiday season to you and your loved ones. And maybe cutting back on the things that are just going to cause extra stress and not really add to that meaning. Take a step back and think about what is the most important to you and your family members right now. What do you value? What makes the holidays meaningful? And who are you doing all of these things for? And thinking about how you're balancing the needs of different people that may play a role in the holiday season for you, yourself, your loved ones, friends, family, kids. Oftentimes this means compromising and making space to accept that maybe not everyone's getting 100% of their wants met, but that you are meeting those basic needs that you identify as being important. So a good example of this might be a lot of people enjoy gathering together, maybe virtually for the holidays. And that might be really, really stressful for some family members versus others. So trying to balance, is having a large Zoom call a priority? Or maybe instead of doing that, it might be meeting one-on-one via phone with people. Which one is gonna really capture that meaning without adding extra stress? And when thinking about what to prioritize, you might choose to pick things that make your life easier in the moment of a celebration, even if that takes more groundwork to get there, right? Things like delegating tasks. Are there certain family members where it's easier and less burdensome for them to coordinate a virtual get-together? Are there people who enjoy cooking and that would be easier for them? Delegating those tasks so you're not stretching yourself thin where unnecessary. Also, setting up the environment for the day of the holiday can be really helpful. Minimizing distractions, picking a time of day where cognition is the clearest. For many people, this can be the mornings. Also consider using holiday cues that can trigger some of that positive emotion that people feel around the holidays. Things like familiar smells and music. We all tend to enjoy these, and the parts of our brain that kind of are wired for these things tend to be affected much later in dementia, and those can be helpful environment setting cues. And this last point, I really want to emphasize, don't leave out self-care. We can only take care of others if we take care of ourselves first. And often, especially during busy times like the holidays, this is the first thing to go by the wayside. So making sure to schedule time for yourself to decompress as necessary, maybe before or after a holiday event, can go a long ways. All right, next major point, adjusting our expectations. Doing things differently is hard. We all know this, but adjusting our expectations for the holidays in advance can be an important way to minimize that disappointment and frustration we all feel as we have to adapt to change. Right? A lot is different this year, and the best we can all do is hope for the best and plan for the rest. Figure out what is realistic for you and your loved ones during this holiday season. Are multiple Zoom calls or telephone days on one day realistic? Maybe just one is more appropriate. Figuring out that balance for us. Addressing and preparing what you can for in advance is helpful. Things like the possibility of getting disconnected or having technical difficulties. Expecting that and having a game plan for those things can be useful. And we all might have to still be flexible in the moment. Right? Things may not go according to plan. Maybe the day of the holiday is just not a good day for you and your loved one. Maybe this means canceling plans or simplifying them. Trying our best to focus on what really matters for you and your loved one, and allowing yourself to feel all the feelings, and I'm sure there won't be many, can go a long way.
So it's important to remember the kids in all of this as well. With the pandemic, children may not have been around their loved ones as much with dementia for safety reasons, and it can be helpful to talk with children before the interaction. Children are far more perceptive than we may realize, but they still may not fully understand or be able to label the changes that they're seeing in family members. Like, why does grandma not remember my name? Or why does grandpa call me by the wrong name? Or why does mom repeat the same stories? When my daughter was in the second grade, I went to her classroom to talk about the brain, and I was shocked at how many kids knew about dementia, knew about Alzheimer's disease, and could reasonably describe it because they had experienced this with a family member. So it's important to include them in the conversation and planning. Leading up to the holidays, children can have a range of emotions that can be difficult. They can be uncomfortable because of these changes that they're observing. And that may lead to some apprehension in connecting, either virtually or in person. So things to look for would be a change in behavior. Behavior changes often signal that there's something going on. There's something else there. So look for things like if they appear more withdrawn, short-tempered, or argumentative. Of course, this can be a challenge to distinguish in teenagers, but the key again here is changes in their typical behavior patterns. Another way that children can show discomfort is through physical pain, like suddenly having a stomach ache or a headache, or they simply just don't want to interact with the family celebration and do things that they previously looked forward to. Talking about the changes that kids may see or may have already seen can be uncomfortable because you may feel that you don't know all the answers or the right things to say. But there are some great resources out there to help guide the conversation. And not knowing all the answers or being uncomfortable in the conversation can also normalize these feelings, the same feelings that the kids may be experiencing. So it's important to be honest, and it's also okay to say, I don't know the answer, and maybe look it up together. If kids are feeling uncomfortable, remind yourself again who the celebration is for. And you're going to hear us continue to say that throughout this presentation, because that can help you to prioritize what's important and follow their lead. And again, importantly, after the celebration, allow them the time and the opportunity to express their feelings. And remember that for some kids, this may come through as behaviors rather than words. How we communicate is an important way of connecting with our loved ones. And this includes not only the language we use, but also visual expressions of language. So first and foremost, it's important to maximize the perception of information. If your loved one uses hearing aids, make sure they have batteries, make sure they're working, and make sure they have them to put on. Some people prefer to take their hearing aids off and use headphones to maximize the communication. Whatever it is, make sure that you ask for their preference. How you communicate is just as important as understanding the communication changes that can happen in dementia. As Dr. Werhane discussed earlier, there are many different types of dementias, and there are many different stages, all of which can influence the challenges in language and behavior. So the recommendations that we're giving today they may change based on the stage of cognitive impairment or dementia. So keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, that these are launching off ideas. When a person has dementia, their reality can change. This may include things like hearing or seeing things that aren't there, recalling information or details incorrectly from stories. Their sentences may not be connected to the topic of conversation. And when this happens, keep in mind that entering into their reality can help them to feel connected and feel safe. It's human nature to want to correct misinformation, but our loved ones with dementia have potentially lost the ability to reason and think through things as they once did. So correcting misinformation can lead to more confusion and maybe even fear. So rather than correcting this information, gently redirect the conversation as needed. Strategies to do this can vary with the type of dementia that a person may have. But generally, it can be helpful to have a few pre-picked go-to and familiar topics that your loved one enjoys, which can help them to re-engage in the moment. It can feel easy to exclude a person from the conversation if they seem to be struggling. But keep the conversation focused on a familiar topic and allow them the time to respond or engage. And beyond communication is remembering how we can connect meaningfully with our loved ones when they have dementia. Changes in their language and behavior can sometimes make it seem like they're not in there. But not all memories fade in the same way. There is a saying with Alzheimer's disease, which is first learned, last lost, meaning that memories from long ago are well ingrained in the brain and don't fade until the later stages. So talking about things that bring them joy from their past, remembering who they are on the inside, hobbies they enjoyed, these are strategies that can help you to connect with your loved one and choose relevant topics. As Dr. Werhane said, use the senses to connect memory. Talking about the smell of grandma's cookies, or the beautiful garden in front of the house with the pink and purple flowers and the manicured green lawn, or the smell of the grass after grandpa mowed the lawn. Use language and senses to help stimulate that memory. Many of us are pretty familiar with using different virtual platforms at this point, as you are all here on Zoom. But as we discussed earlier, there can be an extra layer of complexity when we're using technology, and even bigger challenges for somebody with cognitive impairment or dementia. A few things can be done at the start to help orienting your loved one to the process. Have whomever speaking introduce themselves. Hi, Grandma. This is Pam in Seattle. You can also put the person's name below their picture, almost like they're wearing a name tag. And you can see that on our pictures on the Zoom screen here. So even if the person doesn't say their name every time, it shows who's speaking. As we discussed earlier, make sure to set some boundaries and guidelines ahead of time with who will be joining. Take turns talking so it doesn't become confusing or overwhelming. Keep sentences shorter, briefer, and add more pauses. And slow down. This can feel awkward and it can feel uncomfortable, especially when there's those moments of silence. But this allows for your loved one to process information and engage and respond. Remember, if your loved one is having a lot of difficulty with language, visual communication can also help. Waving, giving a thumbs up, blowing a kiss, or placing your hand over your heart when you tell them how much you love them. That also helps to convey meaning. And remember, it's okay to laugh. Humor is therapeutic. And at the end of the day, some of the patients I've worked with have such great stories to share and tell, and a lot of them are pretty funny. So I've recruited a few of my family members for an example of Zoom, because even though you may be on here now, you may be seeing the screen a little bit differently. So you can show people on the screen who's talking, you can highlight a speaker, you can have everybody visible. There's a lot of different ways that you can organize the screen. And it can be helpful to take some time at the beginning, maybe even before you connect with your loved one, to plan this all out so you have the best view and you can help them as well. You can show them how, as Mary Grace was showing us, how to turn on and off the camera or how to turn on and off the microphone. You may also want to have a backup. Let them know that if they freeze or get disconnected, that you'll call them to continue the conversation, because it can be confusing when that happens. The share button, the green button at the bottom of the screen, this can allow you, if you have pictures on your computer, as we're doing today and sharing our talk, you can share pictures with your loved one. And again, that can help to stimulate the conversation. So the next few slides will cover some more practical suggestions for how to engage with family members. Again, these may change based on the stage of cognitive impairment or dementia, but they give you some ideas of a starting point. So some things can be done whether the person lives alone, lives in a facility, or they live at home with their family, and potentially there's multiple generations within the family. If someone lives in a facility, you may want to check, you do want to check with the facility ahead of time about their rules, as this may be a very different time for them. But consider bringing aspects of the celebration to your loved one, but in a safe way. This could include delivering meals, whether you've prepared them or it's been prepared by a restaurant or a food delivery service, dropping off care packages, again, remembering to maximize those senses. These items can be appreciated by your loved one on their own or shared and opened through one of these virtual platforms or even over the phone as they're enjoying them. You can enjoy them together. Having tangible items like pictures or mementos can also help to direct the conversation and bring that emotional connection with your loved one. If video chatting is too challenging, figuring out all this technology, consider sending a pre-recorded message that they can watch. If you live near your loved one, consider setting a time to do a drive-by where you can see each other from afar, blow kisses, sing, play loud music through the car. But again, consider if this might be too distressing, not being able to hug and embrace in the way that we may be used to. If your loved one is in a memory care unit or an assisted living facility, ask staff if they can deliver handwritten cards or messages. Staff recognize that during the holidays, this is a challenging time of year for family members, especially when they're separated from their loved ones. You can also ask if it's possible to you can also ask them if they can help facilitate a call or a brief video chat. If your loved one lives at home, again, perhaps there's multiple generations living in the home or nearby, they can participate by doing any of these suggestions, but keeping in mind what we discussed above in terms of scheduling, prioritizing, and keeping it simple. So the recommendations are here for if you're in person, but really that's if the person lives within the residence, because again, the current guidelines from the governor is that gathering with persons outside of the residence is not advised. So here we're referring to if you already live with a loved one who has dementia. It's important to keep in mind, again, who the celebration is for, because again, that will help you to keep your priorities in check. Ask your loved one if they would prefer a virtual gathering or celebration or a phone interaction. If they do, involve your loved one in the choices. Who would you like on the call? Would you like Sally? Would you like John? Ask yes/no questions or closed-ended questions rather than open-ended questions that may be harder to answer. They may want to keep it simple and familiar. So watch for changes in behavior and remember again that behavior changes can be a sign. Perhaps they're feeling sad or confused, overwhelmed, hungry, tired. Use those cues as a sign to adjust the interaction as necessary. As Dr. Werhane said, don't be afraid to ask for help and delegate responsibilities. With any kind of gathering, there's usually hot topics that get people pretty riled up, and this year is no different, but the topics may look a little different or include things that we hadn't previously considered. Some people have strong opinions about the pandemic and guidelines, and that may be in contrast to other family members. So it's best to avoid when possible. That said, some of these topics may not be charged and may be a source of bonding over common perspectives. So use your judgment. If emotions start to rise, and you'll notice this because perhaps you feel annoyed or you feel yourself tensing up or getting hot, or you notice your loved one heating up in the conversation, step in, Redirect the conversation as necessary. And this is when having a few go-to topics in your back pocket can be helpful. Or if you're in the house with the loved one, you can ask them to come help in the kitchen, completely distract them from the moment. There's some activities that can be done together and or virtually, and here are a few ideas. You can ask everyone who's comfortable to share what they're grateful for this holiday season. It may be that family who live across the country, who may not have been able to travel, regardless of the pandemic, are now able to join via a video chat. To help with language and thinking difficulties, you can help by prompting the conversation, by having starting phrases. I'm grateful that Mom is on the call today. Mom, are you grateful to see Sally? Hopefully the answer is yes in that case. If you are together, you can also watch a movie or bake together. Being together or virtual, you can sing, make music. There may be some games that you can do virtually. You can do decorations and hold them up to the camera to show each other. And of course, show pictures and talk about memories from, again, those memories from the past. Things that will be doable over the virtual platform, you'll have to play with a little bit and see how easy these things are. But you can also draw and hold those pictures up to the camera, as I was saying. So just a few take-home points to consider. We all know that the holidays can be wonderful and stressful, and this year has an extra layer with not being able to celebrate in the ways that we have previously. It's okay to grieve that loss. It's okay to feel sad or angry or whatever it is you feel. But if those feelings are consuming and become the focus, then someone may miss out on being present, being there for that experience. So the key take-home points for today are to prioritize what matters most, be flexible, and adjust your expectations. And know that even the most perfect plan usually has a flaw somewhere, especially when technology is involved. Optimize communication and find ways to connect meaningfully. Think about what approaches work best for you and your loved one and their living situation. Importantly, have grace on yourself. This is hard. This is hard for everyone, and this is even harder for somebody who has cognitive impairment and dementia. Given what we have available to us, it's important to think about how we can make the most out of this holiday season. This is something that we think about in all aspects of life, but now more than ever with COVID, this brings this topic into a sharp focus. The next few slides we have, I'm not going to discuss. They're resources that are available for you and will be on the talk that's going to be uploaded. This includes a mobile device guide for both Android and Apple, and it includes different key symbols, how to make downloads, etc. So this is there again for your reference. Also different video chat options, things like FaceTime, Skype, and Zoom. You can Google them for how to use them, or just pick a friend and try and play through them and see the best ways to make them work. Here are some additional resources from the National Institute on Aging, Holiday Hints for Alzheimer's Caregivers. Also, the Alzheimer's Association is an excellent resource. This is the holidays and Alzheimer's during COVID-19. There's also a parent resource for talking with children. And then again, the Alzheimer's Association has a 24/7 hotline that is staffed by master's level social workers who are there to answer your questions at any time. And with that, we'll say thank you, and we wish you all a happy holiday, and we'll open for questions.